It is great to have you all here today. This is the session Outliers Among Outliers, the Care and Tending of the Profoundly Gifted Child. It's being presented by Molly Isaacs McLeod. Molly Isaacs McLeod is an attorney, a mediator, an educator, and president of Gifted Unlimited, LLC. Molly has served on the Governor's Task Force on Gifted Education, the Council on Gifted and Talented Education for Kentucky, and the Board of Directors for SANG. Molly is a homeschooler and mom to 3 profoundly gifted sons, and we are so happy to have you here today, both as a presenter and as our platinum sponsor. Thank you, Molly, for being here today.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for having me. This has been such a wonderful opportunity to further my network as far as people who are out there doing all the good work that we're all trying to get done in regard to gifted education. So Gifted Unlimited, it has been our pleasure to help with the conference, and it's given us good opportunity to catch up because we're not doing all that traveling anymore. So it's been nice. So thank you so much.
Molly, I'm just gonna add really quickly that participants should add their questions in the chat box, and
absolutely
at appropriate times I will relay them to Molly. So
perfect.
You have, please put them in the chat box.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, as throw it out there as it occurs to you, and Lori will sort of monitor what makes sense. She's also I've done a lot of trainings with Lori, and she has this uncanny knack for being able to cluster questions so she can represent 5 questions with one. She's really good at that. So thank you. So welcome. I'm so glad that you're here, and it's a little different not being in front of folks and in my office, but this is wonderful too. So I'm glad that you're here. Outliers among outliers. So we have gifted, but then we have profoundly gifted. And we'll talk about sort of what the definition of that is and sort of what those profoundly gifted students need. Statistically, if you're a teacher, your chances of encountering one of these children, I was looking at some numbers, not my thing, but I was looking at some statistics yesterday, and you know, if you have 24 children in your class at any given time, your chances of running into a profoundly gifted child, you'd have to teach like for 70 years or something to ensure that that would happen. So we really are talking about sort of thin air, and I appreciate your spending some of your time with me to talk about this very small but definitely needy group. So when we talk about profound giftedness, what exactly is that? And I know you all are familiar with the bell curve here. Can you see my cursor? I just want to make sure. Oop. Well, now, there we go. Okay, so when we're talking about the profoundly gifted, you know, we have the normal range, we have the above normal but not gifted, and then pretty much anything above, you know, a 98th percentile or 130 IQ is going to put you in the gifted range. And so what happens when you hit 145-ish and your percentile, your student's percentile is greater than 99.9? So it's this piece that we're going to be talking about today. Depends on who you ask. There's no completely agreed upon definition of giftedness. It's defined in a number of ways. And so when it comes to profound giftedness, the definition gets even a little murkier. Generally accepted terms though, 99.9th percentile, 3 standard deviations above the norm, or an IQ of 145, 150 plus. Some of the information that you see when you research will be based on old IQ tests, and so they might have gone up higher. Now they max out at like 150, 160, maybe 170-ish. So pay attention to the dates of the information that you're reading. But yeah, these are three pretty generally accepted. I know Davidson Institute of Talent Development, which we'll talk about a little bit later, looks for 99.9th percentile, and they're looking for scores of 145 and above. So why does it matter? Why do we want to talk about these very few, people who don't exist in great number out there? A profoundly gifted child is just as different from the general population as the gifted child is from the general population. So by way of visual aid here, if you've got gifted kids in this range, and they're very different from the norm, a standard deviation above the above average. When you get into your profoundly gifted and beyond, there's the same statistical difference. So they truly are that different, and have slightly different needs, frankly, more demanding needs. The other piece of this that always kind of makes me a little sad is that they are statistically even less likely to be able to find that true peer in a classroom. So whether it's classroom, sports team, Sunday school, whatever it happens to be, the chances of them finding someone who is more or less like them is significantly less than that of certainly the general population, but even less than that of the rest of the gifted population. So what does profound giftedness look like? I have my youngest son pointed out that I have lots of pictures of little kids. Of course, this can apply to older kids too, but somehow there were just more pictures of younger children. As outliers of outliers, PG persons comprise less than 1% of the population. So again, hard to find that true peer, and not something that as an instructor or an administrator, you're going to encounter every school year necessarily. And they are, distinguished by their incredible ability to process all kinds of information. I know all children are like sponges, but these are like the super soaker sponges. They are able to gather so much information, process so much information. They may have special talents, whether that's, musical instrument or painting, or there are an array of things. And they also have incredible sensitivities and intensities that go along with that. So while profound giftedness can look like this cute little fellow, it can also look like this. So there's emotional intensity that on the one hand can bring about a great deal of angst and sadness, but by the same token can also bring about an incredible sense of peace and calmness. This young man is obviously listening to something that is affecting him very, very deeply, and same way with this little girl. But again, with that intensity and depth of feeling, and their high degree of emotional sensitivity, they can be difficult to work with sometimes, especially when they're young and have not developed sort of a sense of self-regulation of these things. So it's kind of sensory overload, but on steroids. So one of the main things is there is a relentless hunger for knowledge with these children. Their ability to comprehend and master ideas and concepts can leave you as a parent or as a teacher a little drained at the end of the day, because they dive in and they ask questions and they want to engage and they want the information. Excuse me. Allergies, not COVID. All I can say is that as the parent of 3 children like this, having homeschooled them, I am really thankful for Google. I don't know how people did it before. The other interesting thing about this population is that they tend to learn in intuitive leaps. In other words, they sort of learn in chunks rather than in individual items. So you can sort of be in the middle of explaining something and they've already catapulted beyond you. Their fascination with ideas and words, their early ability to think abstractly, are always intriguing and engaging, and again challenging, because you want to be able to continue to feed that hunger for knowledge, and to have them dive as deep as they want to, and then you've got to be ready too when they want to move on to another topic or another area of passion or interest. The other thing that has always amazed me is their ability to see so many different things and find similarities and make unique connections. And they're able to do it pretty quickly for the most part. So they're great to work with, but they're definitely challenging in the sense that it can be a little tiring. So what do the profoundly gifted need? Um, Challenge and engagement, to be sure. You know, as educators, as administrators in schools, um, we certainly want to provide an environment where they can be challenged and engaged. You know, they also need role models for fun and for silliness. I think when you're able to take in so much as a young person, a young little being, um, there's a tendency for things to get fairly serious fairly quickly. And so I think it's important for them to see other adults in their lives, you know, having fun, despite sort of being aware of all the worries of the world, and to make time for that. They also need to be able to be in a situation where they can find true peers, which for this profoundly gifted group is probably not going to happen in the school setting unless the school is one that specifically caters to the profoundly gifted. They also need a safe haven in which to be themselves, whether that is sort of a mini safe haven at school, or for their home life to be that safe haven. And we'll talk about a few of these things in greater detail. So challenge and engagement. Sorry about that, goodness. So myths regarding acceleration have been debunked. As educators, as administrators, as parents of gifted children, that's something anecdotally we probably could have told you all along. There have been short-term studies done that talk about not so much the dangers of acceleration, but the danger of not accelerating your student. And very recently, of course, I'm going to totally blank on it, but I can get back to you with it. There was this wonderful longitudinal study that followed gifted kids like into middle age that debunks all of those ideas around oh, they'll be a social misfit. Oh, you know, there are all these things that they'll miss out on. So all to say, we really don't need to worry about acceleration or to accept that as an excuse for not advocating for acceleration. So what does acceleration look like when you're dealing with a student who is able to move through material so quickly? And I'm not necessarily talking about skimming the surface. It's almost as though they intuit a lot of this material and can just move forward. So I want to be clear that I'm not talking about just racing through for the sake of racing through, but racing through because they know it and they get it. There might be accelerated coursework with boots on the ground. And by that, I mean, even pro-COVID, pre-COVID, there was so much information available on the web, whether it was a MOOC or distance learning from one of the talent search organizations. There were ways to get advanced material into the hands of gifted students. The one thing that I think is really important if you choose to go that route is to look at boots on the ground support, in that great that, you know, Johns Hopkins CTY offers Cal 3, but because of the rate at which these young people process information, it may not be enough to have that online instructor that you have to email and wait to hear back from and set up an appointment. They may need to have someone in the building or readily accessible to them who can provide support for learning that material. The other thing to think about is dual enrollment. And this is where I don't know, a lot of people get nervous. They're like, I'm not sending my 11-year-old to college. Well, try to help parents think, and maybe you need to try to help think too, about dual enrollment as college for content, not college in the sense of sleepaway college, not for that 4-year social experience, end of adolescence, early adulthood experience that we associate with going to college, but rather college for content's sake. And you know, there are a lot more universities now that are open to having younger students on campus. So the student, whether they're in middle school, elementary school, high school, whether they're in a brick and mortar school or a home school, they can be dual enrolled at the university and attend courses that are in areas of passion and or interest. And it's a very different experience for them than, of course, like being in a dorm. So they're still living at home. There are, of course, residential residential high schools on college campuses, and that might be another option. But for a really young child, grade school, middle school, you might not be ready. The parent might not be ready to sort of send them out. The student might not be ready in all respects to engage in that kind of environment. So thinking outside the box, oops, I keep doing that. Thinking outside the box is certainly important as an adult who is on the team of support for these young people, whether you're a parent or a teacher or an administrator, guidance counselor. Think in terms of internships and mentors. Think in terms of community interest-based clubs. What would you, as an adult pursuing a particular area of interest, how would you look for that? You'd probably look for a group of people who share that passion. And so to the extent that it is developmentally appropriate, socially appropriate, you really might think about having children join or play a role in some of those broader community settings. Of course, checking it out for safety and that type of thing and appropriateness first. But you may have to sort of go beyond the clubs, et cetera, that are available in the school. So silliness and fun, and yeah, I'm noticing a theme with the younger children here. So permission to have fun and to be more than academically brilliant. I think when children are, you know, demonstrate this type of ability, it's almost like stupid pet tricks on, or can turn into something like stupid pet tricks on David Letterman. I think there's so much focus, especially by people who don't know them as individuals and human beings, to sort of focus on, ooh, look what they can do. And while all of that is fascinating and wonderful and part of their identity, it really should not become the entirety of their identity or the only piece with which parents and teachers interact with them. So, you know, get outside, play games for fun, engage in some life skills adventures, you know, change a tire, learn to switch out a light switch in your house. Some of these things are going to require intellect, of course, and ability, but some of them also just incorporate sort of learning how to function in the world. And those things are very important too. The other thing I want to say in this regard is, and I realized I really didn't include this in my slides. One thing to think about too is that some of these children are going to be just natural introverts. So what you may have envisioned as your child's or your student's future, as far as like lots of friends and being, you know, very, very socially interactive, may or may not be who that child really is. And so while you know, if they do tend to be a little introverted, try to support that. It is only when that starts to pose a problem for them that maybe you need to look for help. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, accept that child as who he or she is in their entirety. True peers, those few who truly get you. So back to these numbers, that's kind of the sad part. If you've got an IQ of 145, you're roughly 1 in 741. So the chances that a child is going to find that intellectual true peer in K through 5 is within that building, probably not. The chances are not great. And then, of course, the higher you go, the less frequency those numbers turn up. So the nice thing, or the happy side of this, is that gifted children seem to have radar for one another, and that ability to see and respond to one another, in my experience, probably in yours, goes well beyond age. So when you have a group for an outing, or a group activity for profoundly gifted children and their families, it's amazing the connections that are just made super quickly. All you need to do is either witness it or talk to someone who has seen it, and it is a thing. So the safe haven in which to be themselves. So we're talking about
I'm
a
sorry.
place. Oh, go ahead.
I
Sorry.
would like to interrupt because it's an appropriate place. You,
Yeah.
you're talking about them being able to kind of have that gifted radar and seek like-minded peers. We have a question from Natalie, but how can parents help find those intellectual peers for their profoundly gifted children?
I am so glad that you asked. That's a really good question. Um, I think part of it is probably doing your research, reaching out to the resources available. So, for example, there's the Davidson Institute for Talent Development. They have a wonderful program called the Davidson Young Scholars. So, for children who are between, I think it's the ages of 5 and 18, I don't think it's 6, I think it's 5 and 18, who are residents of the United States. Um, children can become a Davidson Young Scholar, and they do offer some, or at least pre-COVID, offered some in-person gathering opportunities. But the really neat thing about Davidson, at least for my family, for example, has been that it puts you in touch with other DYS families. So you might have some type of a gathering that is regional or statewide or local. So that's one way. Davidson Institute for Talent Development, getting on some of the Facebook groups for profoundly gifted families of profoundly gifted children, can also be a way to sort of create that. I remember one time I held a picnic for Davidson families. And I mean, truly, this was a bring your own, because there are lots of food sensitivities and allergies and all kinds of things. So bring your own. We supply the yard, some drinks, and let's have good family fun. I live just outside Louisville, Kentucky. I had a family in Arkansas wanting to know if they could come. And I just thought they must feel so alone to be willing to drive that far for. This wasn't like a weekend at a park or something. I mean, this was truly evening in the backyard picnic kind of thing. So those are some of the things that you can do. Davidson has been a real godsend. I know there's also PGR, or Profoundly Gifted Retreat, which arranges gatherings for families. And those people will, once you make a couple of connections, then your world sort of expands. And because people in this range are so rare, you're likely to do things that you wouldn't ordinarily do. For example, you might drive 2 hours for a play date. You might not do it every day, but you're willing, you've got to be willing to go a little bit further than you might. Now, if you live in a large metropolitan area, or if you live in an area where, because of like a university setting or something like that, you may tilt the odds a little more in your favor. And some people, I'll be honest with you, Davidson has an academy, at the University of Nevada, Reno. And there are people who actually pick up their families and move there so that their children can have that experience of being in school with true peers. So does that answer?
Yes, thank you so very much.
Sure, absolutely. So the safe haven in which to be themselves. Certainly as parents, we need to try to foster this in the home. As teachers and educators and administrators, I think we need to try to foster a little bit of this in the school. As if we don't have enough to do, but this is certainly very important. So, especially speaking in terms of the home, a place of unconditional love and emotional support. It's very intense to be a little being and be this capable and this intuitive, and this receptive to information. So as parents and as a household, we have to be willing to let them be who they're going to be. Now, does that mean misbehavior? And no, but it does mean being very on top of our parenting game. And I'll just say that, if you have profoundly gifted children and they're your biological children, chances are you are in or close to that range. So you're dealing with a humming household of people with a lot of intensities and sensitivities. And so you can't be on top of it 24/7, but it's sort of something to aspire to. It also needs to be a place where failing or not living up to the at times ridiculous standards that they set for themselves is okay. And that they can feel supported, and then just like all kids, being tired, being grouchy, whatever it is, whatever the expectation is sort of in the outside world, home needs to be a place where you're accepted for who you are and where you are at that point in time. As a parent, I feel like it's also really important to bring safe, understanding adults into your family's life. Other people who sort of get it and can support and help think innovatively. I think as parents, we certainly have an emotional investment that an aunt, an uncle, a godparent, a close family friend, while they care about our children, they're not quite as emotionally wound in as we are. And that can be of tremendous support, not just to the child or the teenager, but to the parent as well. And try to set the house up in a way that is conducive to quiet and calm. I think there's so much going on in those little brains that having those little nooks and crannies in your house to curl up with a book or to take a nap or to sit with a pet can be very, very meaningful. So I don't know if anyone has said this or thought this, but it's like, wait, aren't all these things desirable for all children? And yes, of course they are. However, for like we've talked about, gifted students, and Lori, I think you're the one who introduced me to this definition. Gifted children are no better, no worse than non-gifted children, but they are just more. And profoundly gifted students would be more, much more. So providing for their social, emotional, and educational needs requires a lot of energy and a lot of unique thought. And facilitating and supporting their goals and their projects, not that you're doing it for them, but if a child in the normal range comes to you, and they want to, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of a good example. And they want to, build something. The scale is going to be so much different than that for something suggested by a profoundly gifted child. And not that everything has to happen to the scale that they're looking for, but you really have to think, how can you best help facilitate it in the same way that you would guide and facilitate for any child who wanted to pursue something? You would do that obviously for a profoundly gifted one, but the scale is so much bigger and larger. So here are a couple things that I want to throw out. If there are, let me just back up. Are there questions about any of these sort of things that we want as parents and educators to try to provide? All right.
I don't see any questions at this time.
Okay. All righty. So things that I need to mention, and these didn't fit in anywhere in particular. So, so profoundly gifted plus being an athlete, this requires that you engage in some creative problem solving. Obviously, profoundly gifted children are probably going to leapfrog a little bit as far as academically, grade skipping, that type of thing. If they also happen to be an athlete, that can be difficult because once, for example, once a child matriculates at a university, their years of eligibility, like for NCAA, start counting against them. I could probably do a whole session on this piece alone, but there are just, it's not that it can't work, but there are things that you need to be careful about. For example, my middle son started courses at the university as a dual enrolled student, second semester of 7th grade. He's a golfer. And I called NCAA to say, look, I have, this child, is it possible for him to go watch the golf team practice, or to, we have with this university, there's like a community golf team that can be comprised 49% of community, general community, not even affiliated with university members. I said, can he play on that just to get some interaction? And NCAA was really hardcore about it. They said, we do not want him so much as breathing on a golf simulator unless everyone has equal access to it, because that could cause a problem for him as an NCAA athlete down the line. So I throw it out to not frighten anybody, but definitely, dot the I's and cross the T's if you're straddling one of those situations. The other thing that happens is that there are some sports that are run sort of by grade rather than age. So all of a sudden there's asynchrony between a child's chronological age and physical size and where they're placed in school, and that can have an impact on sports. So that's just something that we encountered along the line that I thought I would share. Individual sports, by the way, are really wonderful for this particular population. Not that team sports aren't. They can play football, they can play basketball, but there are a lot more opportunities, like for homeschooled students, to participate at a competitive level with some of the more individual sports. It could be, tennis, swimming, golf, etc. Not to discourage team sports. I think they're great. It's just another thing to sort of navigate. Profoundly gifted and learning differences with this population. One thing that I would really caution parents about and educators about is that because of their ability to adapt and develop incredible compensatory skills very, very quickly, their learning differences might not appear or become obvious until they are met with extreme academic challenge. Now, does that mean you go out and push somebody beyond all limit? No, what that means is that you as the parent or the educator, even after extensive testing, might think things are progressing along quite well, and they probably are, but then all of a sudden there's a roadblock. So it could be that while the compensatory skill combined with the learning difference carries them through just fine to a point, that learning difference may start to emerge in college, in graduate school, or when doing college or graduate level work, regardless of the age or the actual grade placement of the student. Profoundly gifted and existential depression. It's important to have, and this is where Davidson, and this is where having sort of that community of parent peers can be so helpful. Make sure that in your hip pocket you have the names of a couple of qualified, experienced people, so that if you see your student heading, or your child heading down that path, you know a couple of people that you can reach out to more or less immediately. Again, I don't want to scare anyone, but it's important to really be in touch with your child's emotional health, and perhaps even more importantly, to encourage them to be in touch with their own mental health and well-being to the extent that's developmentally appropriate. And not everybody, not every counselor out there is really going to be able to deal with this population. I think they're mostly well-intentioned, but it helps to have someone, even if it's video, telehealth kind of thing, someone who has experience with this population. Profoundly gifted and academic acceleration. I've just got to tell you, chances are with this group, one grade skip is unlikely to be enough. So I'll have a lot of parents think, okay, well, they're in first grade, and so we'll just have them skip to third. What happens because of how quickly they master material and move through material, and I'm not anti-grade skip, all for it. But for this particular group, you've got to think about what you're doing, because oftentimes you'll have that first grader go in as a third grader, and 90 days later, you're encountering some of the same issues that prompted the grade skip. So we're talking about a need for upsized level and pace, not just level alone. In the gifted range, you know, it is not unreasonable to think, in the regular gifted range, it's not unreasonable to think that students might have not just one, but maybe two grade skips over the course of their K-12 career. With a profoundly gifted student, it would likely be more. So there needs to be a little bit more of a plan, because if you bounce that first grader to the third grade, and then you've got that same issue, you know, cropping up 30 days later, you've removed them from their age peers, which is not awful, but it's something to think about, sort of what is the long-term plan with that. Because like I said, one grade skip is probably not going to be adequate. So any questions with any of these sort of ancillary or outerlying matters? All right.
Molly,
So,
sorry,
oh, go ahead.
not speaking up fast enough. So the profoundly gifted plus learning difference category. I find often that this category is very, very creative. It's just as intense, just as sensitive as, you know, but, you know, more problems with school, more catching on, but highly creative. And it's, these are kids that are really difficult because they are such an outlier, but they're not an outlier in terms of academics. Do you have any suggestions for how to kind of deal with that type of child?
The highly creative child, that like one that is either musical or
Inventive, you know,
yes,
but they also have that learning struggle along with, so they're profoundly gifted, they're profoundly creative, but they have the learning struggle.
exactly. Robotics, I think, can be a godsend, honestly, because it really allows children who have learning differences. Maybe, you know, just because you're profoundly gifted doesn't mean you don't benefit from hands-on kinds of things. So being on a robotics team could be really helpful with that kind of thing. It allows them to shine, it allows them to function, at their best with their strengths. And not that you don't want to address learning differences. Obviously, we need to try to provide scaffolding for those, but something like a robotics team might allow that student to not have to focus so much on that, but rather just to be able to move forward with that creative thinking and with that ingenuity. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Thank you.
Sure, sure. You know, the other thing is, you know, there are different levels of robotics, of course, but oftentimes teams for higher level robotics will consider having someone younger on the team under certain circumstances. Sometimes it's a liability insurance issue, but you know, you can sort of push those boundaries a little bit. You know, the other thing is you can, it's amazing if you just ask whether it's a musical chorale group or a youth orchestra or whatever, just because something on a piece of paper says you must be X age to participate, hit override and ask anyway. I think with a lot of these things, whether it's taking a class at the university or participating in some you know, robotics, musical stuff, community theater. Sometimes people just aren't thinking when they put these age things there, or they haven't really thought about the possibility of, oh, there might actually be an 8-year-old who is ready to do this. So you have to be assertive and you have to be, I always think it's better to sort of take the donuts than knock the door down, you know, forcibly. But I really do think that a lot of these things just need to be questioned. Like here in Kentucky, the stuff having to do with dual enrollment for college, I know it varies state to state and sometimes institution to institution, but it says that you can do up to 9, I think it's 9 or 12 credit hours as a second semester junior or senior. Um, and when I pushed that envelope, it just never occurred to anybody that there A might be somebody who would start earlier, and B that it would follow that person might accumulate more than 12 credit hours. So I think it's really important to look at these sort of parameters when you're advocating for your student or for your child and ask the why behind the age. Is it arbitrary? Is it just because that's how we've always done it? Or is there some other reason? Sometimes like with corporate internships, it could very well be, especially like in the engineering field, it could be an insurance issue of having a minor in a certain type of facility. And those things kind of hard to buck against that. But yeah, question, you know, question and pursue. Any other questions? Thank you for that, Lori. Sometimes, you know, there are just things that you know in your head and you kind of forget to share with everyone else. So thanks. Um, so we as parents and as educators and supportive adults need to, we're still needed because these children still need guidance. They've only been on the planet for so long. So regardless of how much information they're able to take in or how intuitive they are or how sensitive they are, and sometimes because they are so sensitive, they still need assistance in connecting with others. So, you know, helping to find that true peer. Um, Reaching out to others, you know, adults as well, who are like they are. They need help with emotional maturity. I mean, you know, no matter how intuitive you are, how intelligent you are, there are some things that you just experience by kind of having to live in the world. I sometimes worry about some of this population as far as the emotional maturity. Some of the profoundly gifted adults that I have met, absolutely brilliant and super refreshing, but there is a naive quality sometimes that, while refreshing to me, I think could maybe be exploited by others, kind of if they fall in the wrong hands. And so I think it's really important for that family group and that extended family group to help them through the, boyfriends and girlfriends and the different all of those experiences that everyone goes through initially, but because of the asynchrony, it's a little bit different for the profoundly gifted child. And support and self-regulation. I mean, I've heard this analogy before where, someone in the average range of intelligence is kind of like television, like most of us probably remember it, or I'm getting older, so maybe not so many of us remember, 4 or 5 stations. And being gifted is, like the, uh, super deluxe package. Being profoundly gifted is like, being a satellite and transmitting in taking all kinds of information. And so there's a certain amount of self-regulation that has to happen in order for that person to be able to live with themselves and in greater community. Um, and direction with aspects of self-care. I think people in helping professions, so pretty much everybody who's here, we tend to disregard our self-care uh, to our own peril. And I think that with the gifted population, and certainly the profoundly gifted population, I think there is such an intensity and such focus once we find our areas of passion and interest that we tend to hit override on a lot of things. So I think as a parent, as a teacher, it's important to model self-care for our children and for our students. Um, and to do that in a way, just sort of you're thinking out loud and you're, planning to make that doctor's appointment, or you're going to work up until 11 o'clock and take a break and then go for a run, so that they can see that that's a legitimate and necessary part of who they are.
Molly, we
Yeah.
have, we have a question from Becky. Says,
Yeah.
this is difficult as a parent, as the kiddo knows everything, in quotes, and is resistant to direction. Or is that just her?
I
I
think it's
don't think it's
all of
just
them.
her.
I think it's all of them. Yeah, it's hard. It really is because um, again, you sort of get into the biological parent piece and the fact that chances are, um, i- as far as innate intelligence, you're probably on a par with that biological child. However, um, things come into your life like children and jobs and spouses and other family responsibilities that take up some of that brain power. And here's this little being who can just laser focus on whatever it is for days on end and then beat you over the head with their information. So I say that kind of jokingly, but yeah, it can be a little intimidating. And I think it is hard to pull rank on these children because they are so bright and they are so conversant with all that they know. On the other hand, I think it is important to try anyway to get across to them, and this is kind of a teenager thing too, gifted or not, that yeah, there's a certain amount of intelligence there, but there's also something to be said for the benefit of experience and having sort of been over a path. Um, so, it's, um, I think you have to earn their respect, as difficult as that may be, depending on your parenting view. They're not going to give you their respect just because you're older or their parent. It's just not going to happen. Um, but I think earning their respect and to a certain extent requiring it. I mean, that's how you have to move forward because you still remain responsible for that child and that child's well-being, um, at least until they're 18. And as parents, we all know it's well beyond that. But it is intimidating. I think, you have to be open to the fact that you don't have all of the answers, but that you are the adult in the room. I don't know if that helps or hurts. You might be like running from the room screaming. I'm not sure. I think giving credence to the fact that they know what they know is important. I think to try to say that you know more just makes it a competition. It's really not so much a competition about intelligence or insight. It's more establishment of appropriate roles, and that can be difficult. I think to spend much time around a profoundly gifted child, you have to be very comfortable in your own skin. And, you know, depending on the day, how much food, how much sleep, that can be tough. Does that answer?
My unmute was not working. Yes, thank you very much.
Absolutely, absolutely. So here are some resources. I don't have links to them because I wasn't sure if, I mean, I'm happy for my PowerPoint to be available if it would be helpful to someone, but I wasn't sure if it would, sometimes the links can look a little cluttered. So the Damon Institute with Sue Jackson is a wonderful spot for helping to find counseling resources, etc., for profoundly gifted children. I mean, she has like private practice. So most people find her if they are struggling for a plan or if their child is struggling in some way. And she is competent and delightful. And I would encourage you there's some articles and things on her site that are very informative and helpful. Davidson Institute for Talent Development, we've already talked about. And I did not catch that. There needs to be an R there. So their Young Scholars program is wonderful. They also have an ambassador program where they fund like a research project or a community service kind of thing for young scholars who apply for that. There are a lot of opportunities there. I have to be honest with you and say that living in Kentucky and having 3 children, we have never attended one of the in-person things for Davidson, but we have hosted things in our region. And the thing that's been super valuable to me, there are a lot of sounds more clandestine than it actually is, but there are a lot of like secret Facebook groups for Davidson families, whether it's Davidson families dealing with twice exceptionality or homeschooling or chronic illness, or there's a whole group of sort of subgroups that are available to Davidson families there on Facebook. And you know, it's wonderful. You know, 2 o'clock in the morning, something is really bothering you. You get up, you throw the question out there, and truly within 45 minutes, you have caring, insightful, informed responses from people who are either dealing with the same thing or have dealt with the same thing. So Davidson is kind of a key to much more than Davidson, I guess would be my comment. A lot of people complain about, oh, it takes forever to do this application. And I remember before I did the first one, I thought, oh gosh, this is going to take weeks. I've got to let you know that if you have all of your testing results and everything in order, I mean, I did this like while watching TV in an hour and a half in an evening. So it's not intimidating. And it's just such a great resource. The other thing that they offer is they have family consultants. So if you're trying to advocate for a particular program or a grade skip or some accommodation at the school, they can be very helpful as far as either coaching you through it or reaching out to the school themselves. So if you have a child who's sort of in that 145 and above range, it's well worth the cost of admission, which is only the time that it takes you to fill out the application. It's a free program. Hoagie's Gifted Education page is absolutely fantastic. I would do a search and look for like profoundly gifted, so that Hoagie's is wonderful, but it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. There is so much information there and it can be a little overwhelming. So you might narrow your search to areas of interest or concern. Living with Intensity is a book by Susan Daniels, and of course, Susan is going to be with us via video recording during the conference. She is so wonderful, truly a PG person herself, and very insightful. Her Living with Intensity book has been sort of the aha moment for so many adults. And I would really recommend, read it as the parent or as the teacher, read it yourself, see what you think. But I really think that some tweens and certainly teens could benefit by reading it, just as an exercise in sort of more self-understanding. I know for a lot of adults who were not necessarily identified as gifted, or who maybe were but haven't thought about it in years, when they read this book, a lot of pieces start to fall into place for them. PG Retreat, or PGR, they, of course, they're not doing it now with COVID, but they host a gathering for families with profoundly gifted children. Usually it tends to be sort of outdoor focused, maybe not quite camping, but sort of outdoor and activity oriented, with lots of downtime. And they do have experts come in and talk with parents, and provide opportunities for meeting those true peers for the students. So I would suggest that you check into that. Before I put up my info, any questions or anything that I haven't talked about that you were hoping would be talked about? I'm not even paying attention to what time it is. Oh,
We have some time for
wow.
questions.
Okay,
So
good.
I just wanted to let people know I did type in those resources, the websites, into the chat.
Oh,
that
good.
paste out of there.
Thank you.
I wanted to mention Your Rainforest Mind is another really good book for
Yes.
family gifted adolescents, young adults, and adults.
Absolutely. I cannot tell you, and I feel terrible that I didn't put her book on here. Paula is fantastic. She just, again, super insightful. I think everything that she talked about in the Rainforest Mind, for those who are not formally identified but read that, it resonates with them. I have a young friend here locally who, she was actually my massage therapist, and we started talking about giftedness, and she was like, I was in some of those classes. I was kind of like, yeah, no kidding. You just sometimes kind of get that sense. And so anyway, come to find out, she and Paula have actually established a real rapport, and with them working together. I don't know exactly what the nature of I don't know what type of relationship they have exactly, whether it's therapeutic or partnership or whatever, but she has like started pursuing all kinds of different things, closed one business, opened another that seems to suit her much better. It's truly transforming. So whether it's Rainforest Mind, Living with Intensity, I really think with these books, it sort of brings home the reality of falling into that category.
We have time for one question. Oh, here's a question from Lisa Aguilar.
Yay.
As
Yes.
a special education district employee, I feel that we have not identified students as being profoundly gifted. Do you have any advice for finding these students?
Wow. I think the ones who, and Lori, I know you're like moderator, but as far as sort of testing, you're probably far more familiar with this piece than I am. I mean, an IQ test is probably going to, barring some major, learning difference kind of situation or twice exceptionality, is going to show that or reflect that. As far as sort of typical testing in a classroom, as just like, you would have to go very out of level, I would think, to pick up on that. Just like you have, go ahead.
As you're a teacher and a parent to your kiddos. What are some of the features that teachers might see in a classroom that may make you go, oh, maybe we need to look a little further into this?
I think that being able to absorb and master material so quickly, like being ready for that next thing, and not just because they're bored or don't want to engage in challenge, but just kind of like, okay, got that, want more. I hate to, this is going to sound really bad, but an impatience with their peers. And you know, if you have like a gifted pullout, the ones who are sitting there still kind of bored, not because they're not engaging, but because um, they're diving in, they're gathering the information, or when you sit down and talk with them and say, well, why aren't you engaging? And they clearly know all of it. So, you know, it's one thing to look at a gifted child in a group of um, normal range kids. But it's those same kind of characteristics that you would pick up on a profoundly gifted child in a group of gifted children. So it's kind of what you look for with gifted, but again, just more or when compared to a higher level group.
I'm sorry we have to close this, but Molly is going to be leading the lunch group today. So if you have more questions or want to talk more with Molly, please come to lunch group in room C.